When thinking about what kind of help you need after sexual betrayal or unwanted sexual behavior is impacting your life, there are three great options that I want to talk about. One is counseling, the second is coaching, and the third is groups. Now, I'm a huge fan of all three of these options, just to be clear. I think I've personally done all three. When I went through my own sexual betrayal, and when Michael went through his sexual addiction recovery process, coaching was not that big of an industry. It was not something I knew about at all. Counseling was really the only option. The tricky thing for me was that when I first had my betrayal erupt in my life, I was living in a location that had no specialists that really knew about sexual betrayal and sexual addiction and the trauma that that causes on the partner. And so, what happens if you see a counselor, but you start to feel when you're the betrayed partner, you start to feel blamed or judged or misunderstood, if you start to be questioned about whether you're having sex with your spouse enough, or if there's some reason why you're not giving your spouse what they need and that's why they strayed sexually, that is a red flag that that is not the right counselor for you. Very few counselors actually have training in sexual addiction and betrayal trauma recovery. And so, what you need to do is figure out who you could see that is trauma informed and coming at the betrayal from a trauma perspective. The greatest way to find this out is to go to apsats.org and look for somebody in your area. So, counseling in general can really do a great job with trauma. However, with the sexual betrayal, if a therapist doesn't recognize what you've gone through as trauma, then they may not be able to serve you well. Similarly, if that counselor does not have training in sexual addiction, and that is what you or your spouse are facing, there can sometimes be more damage than help that occurs. So, for sexual addiction, I would recommend going to ITAP, IITAP. That website, it covers not just sex addiction, but you can specify that you're looking for a sex addiction trained professional, because there's some really specific ways you need help and support from a counselor when you're dealing with sexual addiction, just like when you're dealing with betrayal. Okay. So, counseling in general can deal with trauma and can also do a really great job of helping you look at traumatic things that have happened throughout your life that have impacted the way you think, and they impact how you feel, and they impact all your struggles, right? In general, that's what counseling does. There's lots of different forms of counseling and theories of and modalities, and I have lots that are my favorites. My favorite for marriage is EFT, emotionally focused therapy. For trauma, I absolutely love EMDR, which stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It's a great form of trauma therapy. Somatic experiencing is a great form of trauma therapy. There's lots of them out there. Awesome. Next, let's move on to coaching. Coaching in general is based on looking at your present situation and working towards goals for the future. There are lots of really incredible trauma informed and betrayal trauma specialist coaches. Again, you can find them at APSATS, apsats.org. I personally know a lot of really incredible coaches who work with sexual addiction or sexual betrayal that can do a great job of helping you move forward in your progress on your recovery journey. So, huge fan of coaching. Finally, is groups, okay? This is my greatest area of expertise because this is the bulk of what our ministry does, is create safe communities for people with sexual addiction and a separate safe community for people with sexual betrayal trauma to be able to heal and grow. One of the most powerful things about a group is that you're with other people who are going through that same type of struggle. And it is incredibly shame reducing when you realize it almost will feel like other people are like in your head. When you realize I'm not the only one thinking this way, I'm not the only one feeling this way. I'll give you an example. The other night, I was doing a session with a small group of betrayed partners in our Women in the Battle membership, and we were talking about word curses that have been spoken over us. So some things like, oh, you're just too much, you're like way too much. And when those types of words are spoken over us as children, and how that kind of grows in us, if we feel like, oh, I'm too emotional, or I'm too this, or I'm too that, and we're not able to accept ourselves because of some of those messages that were ingrained in us really young, then betrayal erupts in our lives. And if we were emotional or highly sensitive people beforehand, that's going to blow up even more. And so, as some of these women were talking about this lie that they believed about themselves, that they were just too much, and this wound that started in them as children, and how that wound was really reopened in their adult experience as going through betrayal trauma, it was shocking how many women had that same kind of belief and struggle. And so when everybody started saying, "Oh my gosh, me too, like I relate to that. That's in my head." And we're all of a sudden realizing the things that I have going on in the backdrop of my mind that are informing how I feel about myself, how I feel about God, how I feel about my spouse. Maybe these things are part of a wound and not essentially and fundamentally true about me, because all these women are feeling this way. And I look at her and I know she's not too much. She's just feeling her feelings. God created us with emotions, and they're a gift, they're a barometer to point us to what is really going on. So maybe that lie that I'm too much is not really true. So the part of the power of a group is realizing when you're in a group that is well run, safe, and it's not just a bunch of people sitting there husband bashing. It's not just a bunch of people complaining about their problems. It's people vulnerably sharing their truth and their experience, what they're going through in this collective experience of betrayal trauma or sexual addiction recovery. And they're able to recognize, oh my gosh, maybe I'm not alone. Maybe this is not just me. Maybe this message came from the enemy, or from my childhood, or from the betrayal, and maybe it's not something I have to land on and stick with forever. And that is so isolation busting, I can't even describe it to you. When a group of men struggling with sex addiction are sitting around together and they all realize, oh my gosh, I had an absent father. Like maybe my dad provided, but he was not able to guide me emotionally. And we're not doing this to blame our dad. We're doing this to just take an inventory and realize that impacted me. I need to grieve that, and I need to allow God to father me, and to get fathering from other men who are a couple steps ahead of me. That informs your recovery process in a completely game-changing way. So the power of groups, I could go on and on about it, but let me just suffice it to say, if at all possible, I believe every single person going through sexual betrayal or sexual addiction recovery can benefit from all three: counseling, coaching, and groups. Now, financially, that's often not a possibility. And so I would narrow it down to either counseling or coaching and a group. If you do not have a counselor in your area that specializes in sexual addiction, I would definitely go with a coach that specializes in sexual addiction, because coaches have a lot more freedom across state lines to be able to do things over Zoom or online. Trust me, I know it's not a preference to be Zooming. For a lot of people, we would rather be in person, but sometimes that's not a possibility if you don't have anybody in your area. So if that's the case, a coach and a group is fabulous. Some people start with counseling and they work through the intensity of their past trauma, and then they realize, okay, I'm ready to move forward and look ahead, and then they move into coaching. So one-on-one work with a counselor and or a coach at different points in time in your recovery journey is very powerful. The experience of a group is also really powerful, but the experience that you get from counseling or coaching, that one-on-one work, can really complement the group work, and they're really different, because in group work you have a group of peers and you're being led by a peer. At least in our groups. I mean, the people who lead our groups in Men in the Battle, they are men who have had unwanted sexual behavior, and they have found freedom. They've had at least a year of freedom from unwanted sexual behavior before they're leading. And the women in our betrayal trauma groups that are leading have been through betrayal trauma. There's a way that we can relate to one another as peers, but somebody further along on the journey that is so incredibly powerful and sacred. I just had a woman who has been in Women in the Battle for about a year and a half now and was over at my house for dinner the other night tell me that her friends that she's met since January, a year and a half ago, are closer and know her more intimately and know her more deeply than her lifelong friends before. And so, if you've never done a betrayal trauma recovery group or a sexual addiction recovery group, you may think, oh my gosh, that sounds just really scary. A group of strangers I don't know. Please feel free to message me. I would love to interact with you about why this is such a powerful experience and how we keep it safe so that it's not, you can give as much or as little of your identity as you want. It's designed to be a place where you can be really honest, and it's also designed to be really safe so that you don't have to share any more than you want to. It does not need to be the awkward experience of a support group that you might see in a movie or a TV show. It's actually incredibly powerful and life changing. So that's it for today. I'll see you guys next Friday.